Hello, everyone. Thank you for making it through. We've spent today having a number of really compelling discussions around the investment in infrastructure. And regardless of where you are, what you do, where you sit, we all have a common goal. And that common goal is to leverage smart, targeted, and equitable public infrastructure investments to generate widespread community benefits. This is hard work and it's long work. And there isn't any one solution, but using data is a fundamental way to bring clarity to this journey. And this is the core reason why STV really wanted to be a part of this discussion today with these panelists. So to introduce you to our panelists, we have Liz Smith, who is Chief of Staff at SEPTA, Shawn Smith, who is Senior Director of Strategy and Innovation at Denver International Airport, and Ramona Harry, who is the Chief of Internal Operations, Bureau of Water and Wastewater Administration with the Baltimore City Department of Public Works. So to start this discussion, let's discuss the twin lens of climate change and equity. What does the twin lens, equity and environmental justice, mean to your organization, and why now? Liz, you want to start?
Sure, thank you. So Philadelphia is the poorest large city in the country. And a lot of that has to do with some very deep poverty that exists within the city itself. So equity has to be at the core of what SEPTA does in a couple different areas. In the service that we provide, in how we maintain and build our infrastructure, and in how we do business. So we've really set ourselves on a path over the past couple years to address how we provide service more equitably. We have 3 major projects going on: Bus Revolution, which is a comprehensive bus network redesign for our entire system; trolley modernization, which will make all of our trolleys ADA compliant and create new trolley stations in many of our neighborhoods; and then our Reimagining Regional Rail program, which is taking a fresh look at our commuter rail. And what all of these programs together will do is really create a new lifestyle service for SEPTA. So moving away from our commuter-focused ridership services and really providing more frequent all-day service. That in and of itself really starts to change the way we provide service to much of our communities and opens up a ton of opportunity to some of our most disadvantaged neighborhoods. On the other 2 areas, in terms of how we maintain and build our infrastructure and how we do business, when you say why now, I think we all know that transit especially is really sitting in a place where we have historic funding levels. SEPTA's previous capital budget on an annual basis was about $600 million per year. And for our next fiscal year, we're looking at over $1 billion for the first time in our history. And that's partly due to the bipartisan infrastructure law, but also due to a change in our state funding that finally allows us to bond against it. So we've recently put out a $500 million bond for projects. So we have a really unprecedented opportunity to take that almost doubling of our capital budget and find a way to put it to work in a different way. And we just feel that at SEPTA, because of the neighborhoods that we serve, the people that ride our system, and the businesses that exist in Philadelphia that are really just trying to create generational wealth, that we had to do that. And so probably about a year or 2 ago, there were a group of transportation leaders getting together to talk about how transportation was going to implement the Justice 40 initiative. And SEPTA was very happy to sign on as one of the first movers for the Equity and Infrastructure Program, which will really work to create generational wealth for those doing business in the transportation sphere.
Shawn?
All right. Well, thank you for having me, first of all. And, Denver International Airport, I'm going to actually start where you just left off. We also joined with SEPTA as one of the first 5 movers in the Equity and Infrastructure Project. Why did we do that? Because our stakeholders expect us to utilize our dollars and our power, frankly, to help those who live in underserved communities and to make sure that all of our passengers are served. And so for us, equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility are key one of our guiding principles in our strategic plan. And we did that with intention. Our focus is to make sure that from within, our employees understand that this is not just something that's, a poster on a wall, it's an expectation. And we should engage with our passengers, our customers, our community stakeholders, and with our vendors in a way that fosters growth in our EDIA principles and also creates an expectation and understanding that all who do business with DEN, all who work with DEN, we want you to share in our values. And the same goes for our sustainability work. We recognize, and I'll tell you, our stakeholders in Colorado very much expect us to be good stewards of the environment and to also think about environmental justice in the projects that we're doing. Denver International Airport it is the largest airport by landmass in the United States. We got a lot of land. But I can tell you that we still have communities building around us. And we really have to be thoughtful about the way that we're approaching expanding our own facilities and our own footprint on our land so that we're making sure we're not creating additional barriers for those that choose to live around our airport.
Good evening. Thank you for having me. So for Baltimore City, our focus on equity starts in the mayor's office and it trickles its way down. The mission of the mayor's office on equity and civil rights, it is their mission to work on removing inequality, inequity, and discrimination. That trickles through all of our organizations and our agencies. For the agency that I work for at Department of Public Works, we have the largest number of capital projects. So I will say that Baltimore did start over 10 years ago implementing minority goals. We did the disparity study. We've had it in place. It has been city law and requires all projects being bid to have a certain percentage of minority participation when it comes to businesses, doing business with the city. For the water department, the Bureau of Water and Wastewater, we touch every citizen. From the time you wake up to the time you go to bed, the Department of Public Works is either providing sanitation services, or we're providing clean water or treating wastewater. So we're there for you from the time you get up to the time you go to sleep. And a lot of citizens take that for granted. However, we have a diverse city and we have diverse neighborhoods, and we have to make sure that all of those neighborhoods are treated equally and that they're treated fairly. So that is one of the things that we've been doing. So for us, it's not necessarily a why now, it's we have been doing this and we need to just step our game up even further and do more. So
I think that's a perfect transition to going a little bit deeper into some examples, from each of your agencies on how you set the equity agenda and what are some programmatic examples that you've already started to implement. Mona, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. For Baltimore City, for the Bureau of Water and Wastewater, we're doing a couple of things. As I said, all of our capital projects include minority participation. They require all of our consultants and contractors to participate. We have a Baltimore City employment law that all participants are required to try to include Baltimore City residents when they're hiring. We then also, in our planning stage for our CIP projects, we measure equity and neighborhood equity and where that project is going to be placed. We measure and weigh that score so that they're included within the selection process. In addition, one of the other things that we launched just a week ago is a program called Be More Wise, and it is specific to the water infrastructure industry. We have about 2 million people across the US that are part of the water infrastructure industry. However, about a third of those people are able to retire tomorrow. So we can have all the infrastructure dollars, we can build all the things, we can, and we'll have consultants and contractors to build them, but when everyone walks away, who's going to operate it? We have a serious issue of finding a workforce to operate those systems. So in the Be More Wise program, what we're doing is we are reaching out to those underemployed, underserved communities, returning citizens who have been engaged with the justice system, so that we can train them to take a hold of those jobs. And these are well-paying jobs. They're career jobs that, unfortunately, with the large retirement that we're seeing, no one's working the crafts. No one's trained to take those positions. So we have a very intensive program that we've just launched in the last week. It's a 3.5-year program. So you start out with 6 months of training, intensive technical training. You go on to a 3-year apprenticeship, and then you go on to us helping you to test to get your actual license. So we're not thinking just what's the short-term fix, We're thinking, okay, how do we build this workforce over the long term? And now how do we also look at taking that program into high schools and getting high school students who may not want to go to college interested from their sophomore year, not just the end of their high school career, but how do we start them early on moving into the crafts and into those water infrastructure positions?
All right, so I'm going to pick up right there and talk a little bit about workforce first. So similar to what you just described, and I think what we all are facing is a shortage of labor. And that ranges everywhere from the trades to the professions. And so in Denver, what we figured out is two things really. One is they're not going to just show up at our door. And we're going to have to figure out a way to bring these folks in and make them aware of the opportunities. We've got 36,000 employees at the airport. And the reality is that in particular in our underserved communities, kids are growing up never learning about the opportunities that are available to them at our airport, the careers they can have, long careers. And so we decided we're going to do something about that as an airport. So we're currently, we just kicked off the building of the Center of Equity and Excellence in Aviation. This is it's going to be a beautiful, great facility right on site at Denver International Airport. It's going to focus on 3 key areas, one of which is looking at our employees that exist today, building their careers. How do we train them? How do we help them, become leaders? And if they want to become executives, great. We're going to help them get there. But it's also starting at that elementary level and bringing youth to the airport, helping them understand and learn about those careers that are available so that we can invest in that as our future workforce. And that's really important to us. We recognize that if we don't do something, first of all, we have the ability to do something. And if we don't, we're going to end up in much, much worse situation because we're not going to have folks to help get those planes up in the air. And that's going to be a problem. And so that's a big part of SEA. The second part is our small businesses. So acknowledging that they too are faced with challenges and there are barriers that exist, particularly for our historically underutilized businesses. And so predating our signatory to the Equity and Infrastructure Pledge, we took 2 key actions. And so right after Phil Washington, our current Chief Executive Officer, joined us, we actually stood down all procurements for a period of time so that we could do 2 things. One, we wanted to figure out how we could bring equity more present into our procurement process. And it's going to really sound simple, but it took a lot of work. But we established it as a best value. So every single procurement that Denver International Airport puts out and offers, a successful proposer is required to provide an equity plan for their organization. We want to understand that you get our values. You understand this is important. And you're going to be there to support us when you're on site and when you're working with our employees, working with your employees. That's really important. Second thing is we also had to teach our staff what that meant. And so we took the time to actually train every single one of our selection panelists, both now and at the time, but also moving forward, it's part of their onboarding process so that they understand how to look at equity and how to be able to rate that within our procurements. That's pretty important. Then the last thing I'll mention on this topic is that we also launched the Business Development Training Academy. So it's not enough to say, hey, we're gonna double. So for us signing the equity and infrastructure project, we said, hey, by 2025, we're gonna double the number of small, historically underutilized businesses that serve as primes on our contracts by the end of 2025. That is a fantastic pledge, and we're really proud of that. But what we recognize is that's not enough. A lot of those small businesses don't know how to even get their foot in the door at Denver International Airport. They just don't. And so we created an academy. We just launched it. We just graduated our first 27 small businesses who have never done business with Denver International Airport. And this teaches them how to just start. Small things that maybe are taken for granted elsewhere, like, hey, we have security at the airport that's a little more complicated than other areas. And this is what it looks like. So that's going to give them a little bit of a better understanding. So when they propose, they're being realistic about their future expenses, and they can give us a bid that isn't going to cause them to have to make hard decisions that maybe they don't really need to. Maybe we can help with that.
So I can promise you that we'll be emulating what Baltimore and Denver are doing from a workforce standpoint. We are also struggling with not enough employees and a pretty high turnover rate. We're probably a few steps behind from that aspect, and part of that is because organizationally, I don't think we had the right structure in place to really make equity in hiring and workforce development a priority. I'm very happy to report that as of yesterday, that has changed with SEPTA's hiring of our first ever Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer, who will be a direct report to our CEO, and we even gave her staff so that she has the ability to accomplish things. And so I know that will be one of her big focus areas, but we were able to get moving on the equity and infrastructure program ahead of her arrival. And one of the things that I really like about this program is that they don't tell you how you have to accomplish the goals of the program. They really let every agency say, this is how we're going to meet the spirit of what EIP is all about. So we're still working on exactly what that looks like. We're hoping to end up with 5 or 6 different initiatives as time goes on that really help to move the needle again in building generational wealth. But there's 2 things that I'll share with you today that are moving. The first is our first ever small business set aside. So this is a race neutral program that is creating set aside contracts for small businesses. Now, for our rules, that also includes any DBE firm as well. They technically qualify as a small business. So that includes our entire pool of both DBEs as well as SBEs, which we are now moving forward with certifying. So previously, we really focused instead on, DBE subcontracting and what percentage of the contract were we really focusing on. Now we're shifting gears to try and create those opportunities for SBEs to be primes, because that is what we know will really start to build that generational wealth. So we're slowly moving it out. We've done our first couple procurements for under our micro procurement program, which is $3,000 or less. We're looking to move up to procurements that are $100,000 or less within the next year. So we're hoping to scale up pretty quickly and really have that serve as kind of a learning ground for how some of these smaller firms can learn how to be a prime with SEPTA. But we know for that to really work, we're going to need to expand our pool of SBEs. And so the other thing that we're working on in tandem with CTA in Chicago is we will be signing in mid-January a memorandum of understanding with CTA to create reciprocity between our 2 agencies. So anyone who is certified as a DBE, SBE in Philly is now eligible for work in Chicago and vice versa. So this will really help the businesses in the Philadelphia area to expand their opportunities outside just the Philadelphia area. And it also helps expand our pool of firms so that, obviously we want to prioritize building generational wealth in Philadelphia, but we really want to build generational wealth everywhere. And we hope that this MOU between SEPTA and CTA actually begins to create a national model to create reciprocity across the nation. That's the end goal. So that when you become a certified DBE or SBE for one agency or one area, you have all of those opportunities open to you. And we also have all of those opportunities to fill up our prime contracts with more DBE and SBE firms.
I want to circle back to data, something that came up a lot in some of our earlier panels, mostly from the project delivery perspective. But if we zoom back out and we talk about, really data as a strategy, it improves our decision-making ability, and it allows us to approach problems, and especially complex issues like equity, from a more holistic perspective. So how have you been using data, whether it's from the procurement perspective, whether it's from the workforce challenge? How have you been leveraging data to focus on the issues at hand, and why did you choose to focus there specifically?
So for us, when we're creating this small business set-aside program, we were really careful, and we're still being very careful. SEPTA doesn't have the best data systems in the world. You've heard a lot about that today. We're trying to move into the 21st century, so it's been a little bit of a challenge. But in creating this new small business set-aside, we want to make sure there's actually qualified SBEs and DBEs to do the work for those contracts that we're putting out. So it's great to create a program like this and create that opportunity. But if you have no firms that are qualified to do the type of work that you're putting out, so not just certified but also qualified for that work type, then you're not going to have enough firms to compete for that, or you're not going to get any responses. So as we've been slowly and intentionally kind of rolling this out, we've been very careful to make sure that these procurements that are going out for this set aside have a large enough qualified pool of vendors to be able to respond, because ultimately that's going to show success in the program. What we hope to do moving forward is use that data to figure out where we need more capacity building programs, right? We are very lucky in Philadelphia. We have a lot of partners that provide capacity building for DBE and SBE firms, but they may not necessarily be going after and focusing on the type of firms that we need to do the work that SEPTA is putting out. So we'll be moving forward, really trying to see where those gaps are, and then working with those partners to create targeted programs to create a pipeline of firms that can submit for that work. On the flip side of that, I'll say you've heard it today. I think we all know that data is never a replacement for communication. And so we've also spent a lot of time over the past several years really talking to the DBE community in Philadelphia and trying to find out what they need and what they want. And I'm not sure data was ever going to show us that. And this is definitely the trend in the industry, and I think a little bit behind the spirit of EIP. But they were very, very clear with us that having more subcontractor relationships is not actually going to create generational wealth for them. And so we could have, in the spirit of EIP, said, we're going to increase our DBE goals for every project, to 25%. And we could have checked that box and probably filled, those subcontracts up. But at the end of the day, that's not actually creating enough profit for a lot of these companies to really change that generational wealth component of their company. And prime contracts, joint ventures, and equity partners do. So that's really informed our strategy in terms of focusing on getting these firms to be in that bucket instead of in the subcontractor bucket.
So in terms of use of data, for instance, for the workforce development program, we had to look at our vacancy rate. So the water department itself, the Bureau of Water and Wastewater, we employ at least 1,200 to 2,000 employees just in that portion of our agency. We have a 26% vacancy rate. We also hire lots of contractors to provide services that really should be provided by city employees, because they will have our best interest at hand. Operators at the water and wastewater plant, inspectors, when they're putting pipe in the ground, we need someone who's got our best interest at heart. You can't necessarily put an inspector from a consultant to watch what the consultants or the contractors installing, because then you have no skin in the game yourself. So we need to develop those positions. We reached out to our business partners and we said, okay, what do you not have? What type of positions are you struggling to fill? We wanted to match that with the positions that we had, that we were struggling to fill. And the data said that we were in alignment with our business partners. The same positions that we could not fill, they couldn't fill, and everyone's scrambling for the same pool of individuals. So we came back with a list. We shortlisted. Then we said, okay, what does it take to fill this position? Here's all the criteria that you need. Now let's look to the community and see where we can find people who otherwise do not have an opportunity to fill these positions. Let's do the dating game and match. Let's match and see how we can do this. Well, lots of great ideas come along, and we said, great, we can train them, develop a curriculum. Well, now we need to look at data. Who are the people you're putting into the program? How do you meet them where they are? We now have to write a curriculum that meets them where they are. If you think of operator training, there's a lot of math. You can't just say, hey, I'm gonna grab a high school student and I'm gonna put them in this position, I'm gonna make them an apprentice and hope that they can operate a wastewater treatment system. So now we need to bring the math to where they are. So that data caused us to go out to the universities and say, okay, we need your support. How do we get with the nonprofits to get the people? How do we get the universities to provide the wraparound services? How do we get those organizations that are going to help with daycare? All of those things. So our data, as we started to capture and figure out how we were going to implement this program, stretched. It stretched to all types of organizations and business partners, different entities, so that we can make sure once we invested in these students, they had a path to success. And I think that's the biggest thing, is that when you're gathering the data, you have to go out and have those conversations. You have to have those very deep, intimate conversations of what is it going to take? What is it that you need? And I need you to be candid with me so that I know where the salary is going to fall. Are you going to make it through this? Do I need to do some remedial education? All of those things are yes, there's data, but it takes a lot of conversation to kind of flush that data into something that's meaningful.
Yeah, I mean, there's not much I can add other than, for us, it was important to just understand where we were and understand where the dollars were actually ending up, for example, in our contracts. We might feel really good that we're meeting our goals. Hey, we're doing a great job. Until you start looking at that data and realize that really what you're doing is you're only helping about 5 historically underutilized businesses. Because your contracts are still going, whether they may not be going to those huge, national companies, but they're still only going to a very small pool of HUBs. And that's not the goal. That's not the intention. The intention is about increasing generational wealth. The intention is let's do the best we can to involve and bring as many folks to the table as we possibly can. And that was really important for us, because when we started looking at the data, I'm going to tell you, that's one of the things we realized was there was an overrepresentation of dollars going to specific HUBs across contracts at the airport. And now we're able to actually make some impact there and understand, hey, we've invested in this, we're taking the time to do this. What does it actually mean? And then the second part is, when we look at our industry and look at Denver specifically, the reality is we have a lot of industry that is not available to us through, for example, in NAICS codes. So, there aren't contractors available in specific NAICS codes where otherwise we could create a goal or we could create it as a defined pool. But we just can't. And so this idea of reciprocity for us is a big deal. And it's something that we are leaning all the way into, and we really want to support, because that's going to help our local Denver businesses, which we're all for, but that's also going to help us help those small businesses that might otherwise not have those opportunities. And that's really important to us.
So to close, as a final question, when we started out saying this is hard work and it's long work, so how would you define success?
Okay.
Nobody wants to take it.
So for me, success is yes, we've launched the program. Let's get through that first cohort. Let's work towards using though whether it's the SBA cohorts or it's the workforce development cohorts, let's build a legacy program. Let's not do this because it feels good right now, but let's continue to do it so that in 30 years, when they retire, we're not back right where we were before. You know, we can fill that 26% and say, oh, we won. We did it. They're all filled. But people are going to move on. And we want them to move up in their career. So success for me is when I start to see those folks moving into other positions, and we can very easily pull from the next cohort and the next cohort to backfill.
I think for us, it's pretty simple when these practices just become fundamental, and they're not something you have to really call out. It's a project manager is getting ready to issue a project. This is just standard practice. This is just what we do. That's, I think, for us, how we're, kind of putting the flag in the sand, so to speak, and figuring out, like, when that's starting to happen and those things are just normal, that's when it's going to feel like, hey, we've made some real progress.
Absolutely. I second everything that you've said. We're still working to create KPIs for this program with STV. And I think having KPIs and tracking them is really important. But when we sit around a conference room and talk about where we hope to be, 5 years, 6 years from now, we talk about the idea that these firms that are currently DBEs and SBEs for us are no longer, that they've actually graduated from the program because their profits are so large and they don't fit into that definition anymore. I mean, and then there's 100 more firms to come in and fill their spot. So I think long-term, that's the vision for success that we have and the impact that we hope that we get to have in our region and hopefully nationally.
Well, I wanted to thank you for taking on this challenge and your thought leadership. And if anyone has any questions, our panelists will hop next door and answer those for you. Thank you.